Imagine watching your husband and 8-year-old daughter wave goodbye as they head out for what should have been a simple weekend sailing trip. Now imagine that's the last time you ever see them alive. Welcome to Crime Chronicles HQ. What I'm about to tell you is a story that will shake you to your core. A story about love, loss, and a devastating truth that remained hidden for 12 long years. This is the story of Michael Torres, his daughter Emma, and the wife who never stopped searching for answers. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this one deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss what happens next. In the coastal town of Monterey Bay, California, the Torres family seemed to have it all. Michael Torres, 42, was a successful marine biologist who had spent his entire career studying the ocean he loved so much. His wife, Sarah, was a devoted teacher at the local elementary school, known for her warm smile and infectious laugh that could brighten anyone's day. But it was their daughter, Emma, who truly completed their world. At just 8 years old, Emma was a bundle of energy, with her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's compassionate heart. She had inherited Michael's love for the ocean, spending countless hours listening to his stories about marine life and begging him to take her sailing on their small but sturdy sailboat, Sea Dreams. Michael had bought the 28-foot sailboat 3 years earlier, and it had become the family's greatest joy. Every weekend that weather permitted, they would set sail together, exploring the beautiful coastline and teaching Emma the ins and outs of sailing. Sarah would often joke that she felt like she was married to 2 sailors rather than one husband and one daughter. They were inseparable, Sarah would later recall, her voice breaking with emotion. Emma would follow her dad everywhere, hanging on to his every word. When he talked about the ocean, her eyes would light up like she was hearing the most magical fairy tale. The Torres family was well known in their tight-knit community. Michael volunteered at the local marine sanctuary, Sarah organized charity events at school, and little Emma was the star of her youth soccer team. They were the kind of family that neighbors pointed to as an example of what love looked like. But behind their picture-perfect exterior, Michael had been carrying a burden that he hadn't shared with anyone, not even Sarah. The last goodbye. Friday, September 15th, 2011, started like any other day. Sarah woke up to the smell of pancakes, Michael's specialty, wafting from the kitchen. She found her husband and daughter already dressed and ready for their weekend sailing adventure. "We're going to see if we can spot some dolphins, Mommy," Emma exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement as she showed off her new life jacket that Michael had bought her just the week before. Sarah had originally planned to join them, but a stack of papers to grade and a parent conference scheduled for Monday meant she needed to stay behind. It was a decision that would haunt her for years to come. "I remember standing in the doorway watching them load up the car," Sarah said during a later interview, her hands trembling as she spoke. Emma was chattering away about all the things she wanted to do: collect shells, learn a new sailing knot, maybe even catch a fish. Michael was quieter than usual. But I thought he was just focused on getting everything ready. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael had been distant and troubled for weeks. His colleagues at the Marine Research Center had noticed he seemed preoccupied, often staring out at the ocean with a look of deep concern. When asked about it, he would simply say he was working through some complicated research data. The weather forecast for the weekend was perfect: sunny skies, gentle winds, and calm seas. It was exactly the kind of weekend that sailing dreams were made of. Michael had planned their route carefully. They would sail south along the coastline, anchor in a protected cove for the night, and return Sunday evening. At 9:30 a.m., Michael hugged Sarah goodbye with an intensity that surprised her. "I love you more than you'll ever know," he whispered in her ear, holding her just a moment longer than usual. Emma ran back to give her mother one last squeeze. "Don't worry, Mommy. Daddy's the best sailor in the whole world. We'll bring you back something special from the ocean." Sarah watched from their front porch as Michael's truck, with the Sea Dreams trailing behind, disappeared around the corner. The autumn sun was casting long shadows across their quiet street, and she had no idea she was watching her family drive toward a tragedy that would change everything. That evening, Sarah prepared Michael's favorite dinner, expecting them to return with stories of their adventure. When they didn't come home by their usual time, she wasn't immediately worried. Michael was careful and experienced, and sometimes they would anchor overnight if Emma fell asleep early. But as Sunday turned into Monday and Monday turned into Tuesday, Sarah's concern grew into panic. By Tuesday morning, when Michael and Emma still hadn't returned and Michael wasn't answering his cell phone, Sarah contacted the Coast Guard. What followed was one of the most extensive search and rescue operations in Monterey Bay's history. The Coast Guard immediately launched helicopters and search vessels, while local fishing boats and volunteer sailors joined the effort. The entire community rallied around Sarah, organizing search parties, distributing flyers, and maintaining a constant vigil at the marina. We had over 200 volunteers searching every day for the first week, remembered Captain James Rodriguez, who led the Coast Guard operation. We covered over 500 square miles of ocean, checked every cove, every beach, every possible landing spot along a 100-mile stretch of coastline. The breakthrough came on the fourth day of searching when a fishing boat spotted something floating 3 miles offshore. It was a life jacket, Emma's new life jacket, the one she had been so proud to show her mother just days before. The discovery sent chills through the search teams and devastated Sarah, but rather than providing answers, it only raised more questions. The life jacket showed no signs of damage, no tears or marks that would indicate a violent accident. It had simply been floating, as if it had been carefully placed in the water. 2 days later, pieces of the Sea Dreams began washing ashore. A section of the fiberglass hull, part of the boat's sail, and some personal items, Michael's favorite coffee mug, Emma's coloring books sealed in a waterproof bag, and curiously, Michael's wallet with all his identification and credit cards still inside. The debris pattern was puzzling, Coast Guard investigator Linda Chen later explained. Typically, when a boat breaks up in rough weather, the debris is scattered over a wide area. But these pieces were found within a relatively small zone, and they showed minimal damage from impact or prolonged exposure to the elements. The official search was called off after 2 weeks, but Sarah refused to give up. She hired private investigators, consulted with marine experts, and spent her life savings funding continued search efforts. Every weekend, she would drive to different points along the coast, armed with binoculars and flyers with Michael and Emma's photos. The community continued to support her, organizing fundraisers and volunteer search days. Emma's soccer team dedicated their season to finding her, wearing her jersey number on their helmets. Michael's colleagues at the Marine Research Center established a memorial fund and continued to search during their research expeditions. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, hope began to fade for everyone except Sarah. She became a familiar figure along the coastline, the woman who never stopped looking for her missing family. People started to worry about Sarah, remembered her sister Maria. She was consumed by the search. She barely ate, rarely slept, and spent every free moment either searching or investigating. We understood her need for answers, but we were afraid she was losing herself in the process. 3 years after the disappearance, Sarah faced an agonizing decision. The courts were pressuring her to declare Michael and Emma legally dead, a step that would allow her to access life insurance policies and settle their financial affairs. But for Sarah, signing those papers felt like giving up, like betraying the hope that somewhere, somehow, her family was still alive. How do you declare the 2 most important people in your world dead when you don't know what happened to them? Sarah asked during a support group meeting for families of missing persons. Every morning I wake up thinking today might be the day I get answers. How do I stop hoping? The financial pressure was mounting. Without access to Michael's accounts or life insurance, Sarah was struggling to keep up with the mortgage payments on their family home. She had exhausted her savings on search efforts and private investigators, and her job at the elementary school, while providing some income, wasn't enough to sustain her one-woman search operation. Friends and family urged her to consider moving on, to start rebuilding her life. But Sarah couldn't understand how anyone expected her to simply forget about Michael and Emma and start over. People meant well, she later reflected, but they didn't understand that I wasn't just grieving the loss of my family. I was living with the torture of not knowing. Were they hurt somewhere, waiting for rescue? Had they been kidnapped? Were they trying to find their way home? The not knowing was consuming me alive. Sarah eventually signed the legal papers, but she used the insurance money to fund an even more intensive search effort. She hired a new private investigator, a former police detective named Robert Martinez, who specialized in cold cases. Martinez brought a fresh perspective to the investigation. While previous searches had focused on accident scenarios, storms, equipment failure, medical emergencies, he began exploring other possibilities. He interviewed Michael's colleagues more thoroughly, examined the family's financial records, and investigated whether Michael might have had any enemies or been involved in anything that could have put his family in danger. What Martinez discovered would plant the first seeds of doubt about what really happened to the Torres family. Michael had been acting strangely in the months before the disappearance, Martinez noted in his case files. His colleagues mentioned that he had been working late, seemed stressed about something beyond his normal research projects, and had been asking unusual questions about boat safety equipment and emergency procedures. More puzzling were financial irregularities Martinez uncovered. In the 3 months before the sailing trip, Michael had made several large cash withdrawals from their joint savings account, withdrawals that Sarah had no memory of. The total amount was nearly $15,000, a significant sum that had seemingly vanished without explanation. Martinez also discovered that Michael had been researching something called witness protection protocols on his work computer and had visited several websites about changing identities and disappearing safely. When Martinez shared this information with Sarah, she was stunned. "That wasn't the Michael I knew," she insisted. "He was the most honest, straightforward person I'd ever met. He would never keep secrets from me, and he would never, ever put Emma in danger. There had to be another explanation." But the evidence was troubling, and it opened up a possibility that Sarah had never considered. What if Michael and Emma's disappearance wasn't an accident at all? Martinez's investigation led him down paths that grew increasingly complex and disturbing. He discovered that Michael's work at the Marine Research Center wasn't as straightforward as everyone believed. While his official title was marine biologist, Michael had been involved in a classified government project studying underwater acoustics and their effects on marine mammal behavior. The project, funded by the Department of Defense, was examining how sonar systems used by military submarines affected whale migration patterns and communication. It was sensitive research with potential implications for naval operations, and Michael had been granted security clearance to access classified information. "This changed everything about the case," Martinez explained. "We weren't just looking at a family sailing accident anymore. We were potentially dealing with someone who had access to government secrets and might have been involved in something that put his family at risk." Martinez reached out to his contacts in law enforcement and federal agencies, but hit wall after wall of bureaucracy and classified information restrictions. Officials would neither confirm nor deny Michael's involvement in sensitive projects, citing national security concerns. However, Martinez did uncover evidence that Michael had been increasingly concerned about the ethical implications of his research. Emails recovered from his work computer showed that he had been questioning whether the military applications of his research were causing harm to marine life on a massive scale. In one email to a colleague, Michael wrote, "I'm starting to wonder if we're contributing to an ecological disaster in the name of national defense. The data we're seeing about whale beaching incidents in areas where these sonar tests are conducted is deeply troubling. I don't know if I can continue to be part of this." Martinez also discovered that Michael had scheduled a meeting with a journalist who specialized in environmental and military issues. A meeting that was supposed to take place the Monday after the sailing trip, the same Monday that Michael and Emma failed to return home. The journalist, Patricia Williams from the San Francisco Chronicle, confirmed that Michael had contacted her about potentially exposing what he called devastating information about military testing and its impact on marine life. He had promised to provide her with classified documents that would prove the government was covering up environmental damage caused by underwater weapons testing. He sounded scared, Williams recalled. He kept saying that he couldn't stay quiet anymore, that the public had a right to know what was happening to our oceans. But he also mentioned that he was worried about the consequences of speaking out. This revelation sent chills through Sarah when Martinez shared it with her. Could Michael have been killed to prevent him from exposing government secrets? And if so, what had happened to Emma? But there was another possibility that Martinez had to consider, one that was even more difficult for Sarah to hear. What if Michael had decided to disappear voluntarily, taking Emma with him to protect them both from retaliation? The theory gained credence when Martinez discovered that Michael had been researching remote locations where someone could live off the grid, isolated islands, coastal areas with limited law enforcement presence, and communities where outsiders could blend in without attracting attention. I had to ask Sarah some very difficult questions, Martinez recalled. Had Michael ever talked about feeling threatened? Had he mentioned concerns about his work? Were there any signs that he might have been planning to disappear? Sarah's answers painted a picture of a man under increasing stress who had been protecting his family from his fears. Michael had indeed seemed troubled and had mentioned concerns about his research, but he had always deflected when Sarah asked for details, saying it was work stuff that he couldn't discuss. Looking back, Sarah began to see signs she had missed. Michael's unusual attention to Emma's swimming lessons, his insistence on teaching her survival skills, and his recent purchase of camping and outdoor gear that seemed excessive for their normal family activities. 8 years after the disappearance, Martinez's investigation had reached a standstill. Federal agencies remained uncooperative, leads had gone cold, and Sarah was beginning to lose hope that she would ever learn the truth about what happened to her family. Then, in 2019, everything changed. A whistleblower from the Department of Defense contacted Martinez through an anonymous tip line. The individual claimed to have information about Michael Torres and his involvement in classified research that had gone tragically wrong. According to the source, Michael had indeed been planning to expose classified information about underwater weapons testing that was causing massive environmental damage. But before he could meet with the journalist, he had been approached by federal agents who offered him a choice: face prosecution for treason and put his family at risk, or disappear into witness protection with Emma until the sensitive information could be properly declassified and released. The whistleblower claimed that Michael had been told that exposing the information immediately would not only end his career and possibly result in criminal charges, but could also put his family in danger from defense contractors who had billions of dollars invested in the underwater weapons systems he was researching. According to my source, Martinez explained to Sarah, Michael was told that the best way to protect Emma and eventually get the information released properly was to disappear temporarily while the government figured out how to handle the situation without compromising national security or putting environmental activists in danger. The plan, as described by the whistleblower, was for Michael and Emma to stage their disappearance during the sailing trip, be picked up by a Coast Guard vessel involved in the operation, and be relocated to a secure location until the classified information could be safely declassified and released. Sarah's initial reaction was disbelief, then anger, then a desperate hope that this could finally be the explanation she had been searching for. You're telling me that my husband and daughter have been alive all this time, that they've been hiding from me for 8 years, that the government has been keeping them from me while I've been going through hell trying to find them. But the whistleblower's story had troubling gaps. If Michael and Emma were in witness protection, why hadn't the sensitive information been released? Why hadn't they been allowed to contact Sarah? And most importantly, where were they now? Martinez pressed his source for more details, but the individual would only communicate through encrypted messages and refused to provide documentation or proof of their claims. However, they did provide one crucial piece of information. Michael and Emma had initially been relocated to a secure facility in Alaska, but something had gone wrong with the arrangement. According to the source, Michael had become increasingly agitated about being separated from Sarah and had threatened to expose the entire operation unless he was allowed to contact his wife. The disagreement had escalated, and the source claimed that Michael and Emma had been moved to an even more secure location, but the source claimed not to know where. Armed with this new information, Martinez expanded his investigation to include Alaska and began researching government facilities that could house people in protective custody. He also started investigating defense contractors involved in underwater weapons research, looking for connections that might explain why Michael's information was considered so sensitive. What he discovered was a web of corporate and government interests that made the stakes of Michael's potential whistleblowing much clearer. The underwater sonar systems that Michael had been researching were part of a multi-billion-dollar defense contract involving several major corporations. If Michael's research proved that these systems were causing environmental disasters, the financial and legal ramifications could have been enormous. Martinez also uncovered evidence that other researchers involved in similar projects had faced harassment, career destruction, and in some cases, mysterious accidents when they had tried to speak out about environmental concerns related to military research. "We were dealing with people who had billions of dollars at stake," Martinez noted. The idea that they would go to extreme lengths to protect their interests wasn't far-fetched. But Martinez's investigation took an unexpected turn when he received a second anonymous contact, this one claiming to be a former government agent who had been involved in Michael and Emma's case. This source provided a very different version of events, one that was far more disturbing than the first whistleblower's account. According to the second source, Michael had indeed been approached by federal agents, but not to offer him protection. Instead, they had threatened him and his family if he proceeded with his plan to expose the classified research. The source claimed that Michael had been told that if he went public with his information, both he and his family would face serious consequences. Terrified for Emma's safety, Michael had supposedly agreed to abandon his plans to meet with the journalist and to destroy the evidence he had gathered. But the source claimed that Michael had been secretly planning to take Emma and flee the country, hoping to find somewhere safe where he could eventually release the information without putting his family at risk. The sailing trip, according to this version of events, was meant to be their escape route. Michael had arranged to meet a contact who would help them disappear, but something had gone wrong during the planned rendezvous. The source claimed that Michael and Emma had been intercepted before they could complete their escape, and that they had been dealt with to prevent the classified information from ever being released. When Martinez shared this possibility with Sarah, she was devastated. The idea that Michael and Emma might have been killed to protect government and corporate secrets was almost too horrible to contemplate. "I didn't know which version to believe," Sarah later recalled. "Part of me hoped that the first story was true and that Michael and Emma were alive somewhere, even if they couldn't contact me. But part of me feared that the second story was the real one and that they had been murdered to keep them quiet." Martinez continued investigating both possibilities, but the trail remained frustratingly cold. Government agencies continued to refuse to provide information, citing national security concerns. The anonymous sources would provide no additional proof of their claims, and attempts to verify their identities were unsuccessful. Sarah found herself in an even more painful limbo than before. For 8 years, she had at least been able to hope that her family's disappearance was an accident and that they had died quickly without suffering. Now she was faced with the possibility that they had been killed deliberately, or that they were alive somewhere, but forbidden from contacting her. 12 years after Michael and Emma disappeared, Sarah received a phone call that would finally provide the answers she had been desperately seeking. but those answers would be far more heartbreaking than anything she could have imagined. The call came from a hospital in Anchorage, Alaska. A man who had been found unconscious on a remote beach had finally regained consciousness after being in a coma for 3 weeks. When he woke up, the first words he spoke were, "Sarah Torres, and I have to get home to my wife." The man was Michael Torres. Sarah boarded the first flight to Alaska, her heart torn between overwhelming hope and paralyzing fear. After 12 years of searching, she was finally going to see her husband again. But where was Emma? When Sarah walked into Michael's hospital room, she barely recognized the man in the bed. He had aged decades in the 12 years since she had last seen him. His hair was completely gray, his face was weathered and scarred, and his eyes held a haunted look that spoke of unimaginable trauma. But when he saw Sarah, Michael broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," he whispered over and over again. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save her. I'm so sorry I couldn't come home to you." Through tears and broken words, Michael began to tell Sarah what had really happened during their sailing trip 12 years earlier. Michael confirmed that he had indeed been planning to expose classified information about military testing that was causing environmental damage. But he hadn't been contacted by federal agents before the sailing trip. The threats had come from a different source entirely. A defense contractor involved in the underwater weapons project had discovered Michael's plans and had sent private operatives to discourage him from proceeding. But rather than simply threatening Michael, they had decided to eliminate the problem permanently by making Michael and Emma disappear. During what was supposed to be a peaceful sailing trip, Michael and Emma had been approached by another boat. The men on board had initially claimed to be Coast Guard officials responding to a distress call, but Michael quickly realized they weren't legitimate authorities. "They wanted the research data I had gathered," Michael explained to Sarah, his voice shaking with emotion. "They demanded that I turn over all my evidence and agree never to speak about what I had discovered. When I refused, they became violent." What followed was a terrifying struggle on the open ocean. The men had attempted to kill both Michael and Emma, planning to make it look like a sailing accident. But Michael had managed to fight back, resulting in an explosion that destroyed the Sea Dreams and killed 2 of the attackers. Michael had managed to get Emma into a life raft, but she had been injured during the struggle. As they floated in the Pacific Ocean, waiting for rescue that might never come, Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly. She was so brave. Michael told Sarah, tears streaming down his face. Even though she was hurt and scared, she kept telling me that everything would be okay, that someone would find us and take us home to you. But rescue didn't come in time. Emma died in her father's arms 3 days after the attack, as they drifted helplessly in the vast Pacific Ocean. Michael had somehow survived long enough to wash ashore on a remote Alaskan island where he had been found by indigenous fishermen who nursed him back to health. But the trauma of losing Emma and the head injuries he had sustained had left him with severe memory problems and psychological damage. For 12 years, he had been living in a remote village, cared for by people who didn't know his real identity, struggling with fragments of memory and an overwhelming sense of loss that he couldn't fully understand. It was only when he had fallen from a cliff 3 weeks earlier, sustaining new head injuries, that his memories had finally begun to return clearly. The moment he remembered who he was and what had happened, his only thought was getting home to Sarah. With Michael's testimony and the evidence Martinez had gathered over the years, federal investigators were finally able to piece together the full scope of what had happened to the Torres family. The defense contractor involved in the cover-up was exposed, leading to criminal charges against several executives and a massive scandal that reached the highest levels of government. The classified research that Michael had been trying to expose was finally released to the public, revealing the devastating environmental impact of underwater weapons testing and leading to significant changes in military research protocols. But for Sarah and Michael, no amount of justice could bring Emma back. Michael's physical recovery was slow and difficult, complicated by 12 years of untreated injuries and trauma. His psychological healing proved even more challenging, as he struggled with severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and the devastating grief of losing Emma. Sarah faced her own difficult journey of healing. After 12 years of hoping and searching, she had to learn how to live with both the joy of having Michael back and the final devastating confirmation that Emma was gone forever. People ask me if I'm glad I finally know the truth, Sarah reflected during an interview 1 year after Michael's return. The answer is complicated. Yes, I'm grateful to have Michael back and to finally understand what happened to my family. But knowing that Emma died, scared and in pain, and that Michael has been suffering alone for 12 years, doesn't make the grief easier to bear. The couple has slowly begun rebuilding their relationship, but both acknowledge that they are different people than they were 12 years ago. The trauma of their separation and loss has changed them in ways that can't be undone. They established the Emma Torres Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and advocating for environmental protection. Through their foundation, they work to ensure that other families don't have to endure the years of uncertainty and unanswered questions that define their lives for more than a decade. Michael's courage in trying to expose environmental damage ultimately led to important changes in how military research is conducted and oversight. But the price paid by the Torres family for that courage was almost unimaginably high. Emma would have grown up to change the world, Sarah said, looking at a photo of her daughter taken just days before the fatal sailing trip. She had her father's love for the ocean and his determination to protect it. In a way, through the work we're doing now, maybe she still will change the world. The story of the Torres family serves as a powerful reminder of the real human cost of corporate greed and government secrecy. It's a story about the lengths people will go to protect their interests and the devastating impact those actions can have on innocent families. But it's also a story about love, perseverance, and the power of never giving up hope. For 12 years, Sarah Torres refused to stop searching for her family, and her determination ultimately led to the truth that brought Michael home and exposed the corruption that had torn their family apart. Today, as Michael continues his recovery and Sarah learns to navigate their new reality, they carry Emma's memory with them in everything they do. The 8-year-old girl who loved sailing and dreamed of protecting the ocean didn't live to see her dreams fulfilled, but through her parents' work, her legacy of environmental protection and family love continues to make a difference in the world. Outro call to action. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stories like the Torres families deserve to be told, and your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives. In the comments below, let us know your thoughts about this case and whether you think enough was done to bring those responsible to justice. And remember, if you or someone you know has a missing family member, never give up hope. Sarah Torres's 12-year search proves that sometimes the truth does finally come to light. Until next time, thank you for watching.